Good morning, everybody. If I could have the attention of the members of the committee to get started. Thank you. Well, welcome to the meeting number 1 of the Planning and Housing Committee. Thank you to the members. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I know that we have a group of committed councillors here to tackle the issues, and I'm looking forward to really working with the committee over the next couple years at least that we're going to be here and tackling the issues of today and things that include planning, that include housing, our housing plan that is coming. So I have requested for the information of the committee next month. We will have a presentation on what are the topics that staff have been working on, what are the things coming down the pipeline that we have to concentrate and look forward to working on over the next year. So there will be a full presentation on some of the things that we might expect and that we will be working on in this committee over the next year. So today we have I would like to start by informing that for those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can also follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. And I'd like to acknowledge the land we are meeting on. It's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit of Anishinaabe, Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I would like now to run by the agenda. We have one item on the agenda with the election of Vice Chair, Planning and Housing Committee, which I would hold. And sorry, can I have the, sorry, I skipped a couple steps. Do I have any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. So now we will have the through the agenda election of Vice Chair and Planning and Housing Committee. So I'll hold that because I'll place a motion to have the letter from Councillor Christian Wong Tam and Gord Perks added to the agenda. All those in favour? Seeing none, that carries. So going back to the election of Vice Chair, Planning and Housing Committee, are there any nominations for Vice Chair of the Planning and Housing Committee? Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Fletcher for the position of Vice Chair.
Thank you. Member Councillor Fletcher has, Councillor Wong Tam has nominated Councillor Fletcher. Do you accept the nomination, Councillor Fletcher? Thank you. Are there any further nominations? Are there any further nominations? And one more time, are there any further nominations? And I will consider the nominations now closed. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for accepting and for being our Vice Chair of the committee. Come closer, Councillor Fletcher. Okay, so the next item is the item that we just added to the agenda, which is declaring Toronto's homelessness and housing crisis a state of emergency. And I would ask if there's anybody in the room that would be interested in making a deputation on this item that approaches the clerks, and please submit their name. And so we can start by discussing the item.
Can I just suggest you let everybody know where they should go to do that, Chair?
Yep.
Over here?
Just over here.
Why don't we take a 2-minute break while they get...
Okay, we should be able to start in a couple seconds. Thank you.
Yep, I'm ready.
Good morning.
Good
Go
morning,
ahead.
Councilor Bailao. Good morning, everybody, members of the committee. Good morning. Welcome to Councilor Bradford, TC champion, Ana Bailao, the housing champion, and all the members of this committee who are elected to represent us. Welcome to 2019. It's going to be a very interesting year, and I had to agree with all the members here today that we are facing a housing crisis. We cannot allow any other men or women to die on the streets. Last week, I attended a moment to reflect on the death of a woman who died on a city alleyway. And it was very tragic to see that happening in our city that is so rich and full of housing going up everywhere, but there is no real affordable housing. The term affordable housing is a joke. To qualify for it, I cannot dream of my ODS paycheck to qualify. I want to say thanks for being in Toronto Housing, and I'm paying my sweat of work by coming here and speaking up for the voiceless. We cannot allow this happen again. So I want to commend the office of the Mayor Tory who are listening at the back corner over there. Please take the message seriously that we cannot allow another man or woman or child to die on our streets. Last week, our MPs, they raised their 20% housing allowance. We don't get that. How is it possible? Dog Ford, wake up, dude. What are you doing to us? So I want to say that I want to invite people in the community to come to the police board on Thursday because we're going to talk about the $1.2 billion. And this is important because the pressure on the police budget, it affects all the departments and services of the city delivery. So I want to ask you, please, any member of this committee or members of the public to come to the board on Thursday at 1 p.m. I will look forward to see you there, all of you, because this is important. We have to prioritize either is highly police costs or versus housing and support and shelter and not to mourn another human being. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you for your advocacy work on the housing issues over the years. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Oh, sorry. Any questions to the deputant? Seeing none? Thank you. And the next deputant is Rafi Aaron. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Rafi Aaron, and I'm the co-chair of the Beth Shalom Beth Tzedek out of the Cold Shelter, and I'm the spokesman for the Interfaith Coalition to Fight Homelessness. The Interfaith Coalition to Fight Homelessness represents a number of out of the cold shelters, as well as clergy and faith-based organizations across the religious spectrum who support the work of the out of the cold shelters to provide shelter, food, and security to all Torontonians. We are in a shelter and housing catastrophe. Frontline workers have told us for the last decade how the system was crumbling, how they couldn't get their clients housing or into shelters. And unfortunately, nothing really happened. In January of 2017, the Out of the Colds, for the first time in what was then their 30-year history, began turning people away. And it was gut-wrenching. And we realized that we couldn't do this alone. And when we got together with all sorts of religious groups and everybody from different faiths, we sat in a room just like we are now, and we realized there were some people were running food banks, some people were running meal programs, some people were running Out of the Colds, and it simply wasn't enough. In order to move the dial, in order for something substantial to happen to reverse this tide, we needed the city, we needed the Ontario government, and we needed the federal government to get involved and to do something. Nothing, unfortunately, has really changed. What keeps happening is that we keep expanding the emergency component of the shelter system, which means anytime you do that, that means there's a problem in your shelter system, and it also means that there is a problem in your, essentially, the way that you're housing these people. I'm into my 14th year at the Out of the Colds. I've known some people for over a decade. I have co-chairs who've been doing this for 20 years. There's one man who's been doing it for 30 years, and when he goes to his Out of the Cold and he walks in, he's like a celebrity among the guests. That tells you that something is severely wrong. When he walks into a room, no one should know him. There shouldn't be a guest. Shelters are not to be used as housing, and that's essentially what has happened. There are 181,000 people on the waiting list for social housing. We have shuttered, I don't know how many thousands of TCHC units because they were they just weren't livable. And although we've stopped closing them, what I'm hearing about 2 weeks ago from a social worker was that one of her clients came to her and asked to be removed from there and into a shelter because the conditions were so horrid. This is a situation that we're dealing with, and we need to build social housing and supportive housing in a manner that we did in the heyday of the city when 5,000 units were being built with the cooperation of 3 levels of government. That's the only way that we're going to get out of this. It's to build our way out. And the situation just keeps getting worse. There's overcrowding. There's overcapacity issues. We, at the end, even at the Out of the Colds, we're supposed to be the overflow shelters. And when there is capacity issues, when there is crowding issues, essentially what happens is people that have challenges won't come indoors. So you've got people in parks, you've got them in ravines, you've got them under the bridges, under the Gardner. That's why. So we've got to start tackling this, and we've got to start taking steps because people are dying. And we have all sorts of people. It's gut-wrenching. I was just saying to one of the counselors 2 weeks ago, there was an elderly couple. They were seniors. They didn't want to leave our Out of the Cold. It was 7 o'clock. We had to open the building. They had been evicted illegally.
Can I ask you to wrap up?
They had been evicted illegally, and they are part of the new wave of homeless. They are being evicted onto the streets, and there's no way that they can find housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions to the deputant? One question, Councillor Fletcher.
The situation that the seniors found themselves in to be evicted, what was that? Was it a rental eviction or one of those Airbnb?
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it was a renoviction.
So the renovation,
Renovation, right.
A renoviction.
But I also see seniors, like there's one man I just can't get out of my mind. He's been with us for years. He's got to be in his early 70s. He's completely emaciated. He needs help. Like, he shouldn't be. When you start to look at each person in these overflow shelters and in the shelter system, none of them should be there. They need supports. They need supportive housing.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I do have a question. I agree with you. I usually say when the city has to talk about adding shelter beds, we're failing, because I consider that a failure if we have to add shelter beds, is because we're not doing a good job in housing people properly. We're tackling a lot of these issues. I mean, this year alone, we're having $300 million being invested again on TCHC. We're building housing. We're building supportive housing. You know, we have about 200 units under construction right now. Not enough. But what tools can we talk about that could help you as a partner of ours to have immediate impact? Because we have a situation right now that our shelter and our respite centers have increased in usage by 80% in the last 2 years. 80%. So we've had an increase in usage about 80%. So what tools can we talk about here? What tools can we talk with our provincial and federal partners that would have an immediate impact? Because, you know, we know that it's supportive housing and housing as a solution, but it's going to take time. I can't build a house in a week, right? So it's going to take time. So can you share with us what could be some of the tools to the frontline staff that we need to be talking about?
We need to start building. We didn't have a choice. The city, unfortunately, because there was no housing being built and TCHC was going down, you know, we didn't have a choice. We had to keep expanding the shelter system. That is a result of that. So, I mean, if we had been building the social and supportive housing along the way, we wouldn't have.
I know, but this is the situation we are right now.
Right. So
tell me.
Right now, we need to open up. We have substandard shelters, and it's a second tier of shelters. And what we need to do is to provide proper accommodation. We need to get the city, the Ontario government, and the federal government to open up buildings for us and there has to be caps on the number of people that you're going to have. Yeah. 50, 56, not 100, not 200. We've got to open up these places.
So one of the things that we used as a pilot last year was actually housing allowances, right? From the Homes to Good program, we had housing allowances. And I thought it was very interesting, the previous deputant saying that, yes, our colleagues up the street increased their own housing allowance by 20%. So would housing allowances, would us asking for more housing allowances from our partners, would that be a tool that could help you?
Yeah, but it have to.
Would that be a concrete action that we should be asking and advocating and put it on the table?
That would help stop the tide of new, what I call the new wave of homeless, the people who are being evicted for $600 and their place is going for $2,000 or something. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your work and advocating on this issue. Thank you. Okay, and our next deputant is Anne LaPena. Thanks, Anne, for joining us today.
Hi.
You have 5 minutes.
My name is Anne LaPena. I'm an ambassador for Parkdale Activity Recreation Center with Victor Willis. My concern is when I'm at Parkdale, I see homeless people all the time. I stop, I talk to them, and sometimes I give them money. I am on Canada Pension. I'm in subsidized housing, so I guess you can take it from there that I don't get very much money myself. So I do not get paid for working at Park also. I do volunteer work to keep myself busy. What I see coming through Park is a lot of homeless people. They are living on the streets, and it's not nice. And I don't like it. If there was something that I could do, I would do it, because I am a heartfelt person. And what I heard out there this morning was not nice, and I'm very tearful when I hear things like that. Yesterday, when I heard that I was coming down here, the things that kept popping up in my head is, why are people raising taxes? Why are people raising money for hydro and everything else when these people are living on the streets and the government's pocketing money, and they should be building beds and never mind casinos for Ontario Place. Never mind other money for other things when they should be, from every year, they know winter's coming. Every single year, winter's coming. And yet they wait till the last minute and there's people dying on the streets. Why can they not make a plan from March to March and have this plan every single year figured out of what they're going to do for beds and places for people to go? This has been going through my head all the last couple days. These people are living on the street from March to March. People are like dying out there. Where is the plan? There has to be a plan from March to March, and I don't see any plan out there. It's just they wait to the last minute to do something, and people die. And it's like, I see the government doing nothing until the last minute. And then all these people are coming out to help and trying to get food and sandwiches and stuff together. And yet they've got a whole year and they know winter's coming. These beds could be made up. Places could be built for these people. And I don't understand why or where. It's the same with the homelessness. Why aren't these places built? Why aren't they out there for people? You've got a whole year planned. I don't understand.
And I'm going to start asking you to give us your final thoughts.
Well, my final thoughts is there's too many people dying out there on the streets. There's still people out there on the streets. I see it, I talk to them, I give them money, when I should be keeping the money and trying to help out, but I can't do anything myself. And I want to know, please, everybody knows winter's coming. Why can't you start from March to March and figure out something? I'm just asking the question.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks for joining us today. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you for joining us today. And the next deputant is Kathy Crow. Morning, Kathy.
Hi, good morning, councillors. Thanks. I'll try to be brief and focused. So, I mean, those of you, nice to meet you, councillor. The rest of you all know me. So I guess what I want to say, first of all, I'm representing the Shelter and Housing Justice Network, which is a significantly large group that's growing quickly. And it's a result of people working frontline and experiencing homelessness that are seeing seeing just dramatic escalation in the situation. So we do see it as an emergency. And I want to say that we've gone a far way from 30 years ago and 20 years ago when we thought it was a disaster then. Last winter, you would have known about the advocacy we did to try to get the armory open, et cetera, and that has grown into now a second, what I would call a second-tier emergency shelter system that includes the overnight drop-ins, 9 respite sites, and the Out of the Cold program. Because we feel that we have not been heard from the senior level of council, a few people resorted to doing secret video footage that is going to hit the airways at noon, and the Toronto Star has an article today. And that is to show the extremity of the conditions. And it's not about the agencies or the operators of the site. It's not about the workers. In fact, QP79 was here earlier to support the issues we're raising. It's a disaster. It's the only way to put it. And in Toronto's emergency plan, an emergency is defined as a situation that constitutes a danger of major proportions that could result in serious harm to persons. And I'm a nurse, but you don't have to be a nurse to see the serious harm that has happened to people. People's lifespan is shortened. The average age of a homeless person's death is 48 or 49. People are dying at the rate of 2 or more per week that we know of. What you will see in the footage later is, and I was shocked by this, is the number of people in wheelchairs and walkers and elderly that are in some of the respite sites. What can I say? I think with my length of experience and work in this field, I can only say that the city needs external resources to deal with the crisis. The city needs help from outside. The city needs to say that. I hope that council will say that it's an extraordinary circumstance when you have approximately 8,000 people in an emergency shelter system and they're stuck there because of the social housing wait lists. And then we now actually have 1,050 people, 1,050 that are staying on floors or mats or cots in this second-tier system. And some of the images look like post-Hurricane Katrina, and we need help. We need help from outside to deal with this, but at the city level, I really do feel that the Emergency Planning Committee of the city should be meeting and doing very specific things, calling in the Red Cross to assist, figuring out how to pull resources from other departments to reallocate them to work on the shelter emergency, including, for example, public health. There's absolutely no reason why public health resources can't be employed. And I say that because on Sunday, and this is what brought me to tears out there, on Sunday, I had to help wheel a woman in a wheelchair into one of the respite sites who is paraplegic, has a catheter, and is deaf. Here I go, I could go again. So, and that is not, I was shocked by that, but that's not a rare situation. So why we are not deploying more health resources in the shelter, but also the capacity issues have to be spoken to. I was okay with one of the domes opening and having 100 people in it as a test, but within weeks we knew that that wasn't going to work. So
I'm going to ask you to start.
I'll wind up. So there are very specific measures that the city could do now, and one of them will be council endorsing a state of emergency declaration, the wording that the councillors have prepared, calling for external help, but locally deploying resources and opening up more facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Councillor Fletcher?
Or anything else that you wanted to tell us that you, because you finished your time, feels critical for us to know, Kathy, this morning?
Well, I'd like the city to respect international rights with respect to squatters and not move to eviction under the Gardner. There are other measures. I spent Saturday under the Gardner. There's other measures that have to be taken. There's people internationally that will work on that. I'd like you to increase your rent bank. I'd like you to deploy resources to fast track as much as you can on measures that are currently in the works. You know, if an empty school is determined to not be suitable for shelter because of the fire marshal saying so, then resources should be allocated to fix it, and that's the Bank Street site. It's a Catholic school. You know, I just think things have to be fast-tracked, and that has to come from the most senior level of officials here.
Do you support fast-tracking, as you say, support for tenants that are now taking their landlord to the tribunal because of the
Sure.
the renovictions
Oh,
that
absolutely.
they're facing? And to
Absolutely.
increase the amount and be able to move quickly on that in order to stay in their homes?
And if I can
And to
say, you
support
know,
them, is there some way to support those tenants a little more, in a more robust way that you may have thought of? Those who are going to the tribunal?
yeah, I'm sure,
On
like,
behalf of the buildings, with your organization, is that something that?
well, our organization, we're a network, right? We don't have staff. Like, we're
No, I
we're
know.
a network, a coalition, but we've got legal clinics, and there's a lot of networks in the city that could be working on that for sure. I will say that I think what we're presenting to you today in terms of the footage suggests that senior officials should be asked to do what I would call a disaster tour and visiting every single respite site and location to look at some immediate measures that can be taken. 2 toilets were out of order at one of the sites. I think immediate measures should be taken to de-crowd, to bring down the capacity in some of the facilities, and you have to do that by opening the others. And the dome number 2 and dome number 3 are not due to open till March or April. And where is dome number 4? And where is anything for Scarborough, North York, or Etobicoke? So those are some emergency spots right there.
Thanks. I look forward to more discussion about how to keep people in their homes and be able to support them at the tribunal from the community side,
Yep.
which would be helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next deputant, AJ Whiters. AJ, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. My name is AJ Withers. I'm a PhD candidate in social work at York University, and I'm representing the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. Good morning. So Crystal Papineau, an Indigenous man whose name hasn't been made public, Hang Vo, and Tabitha Lewis are just 4 of the people that have died this year. Tabitha Lewis is a name that I'm sure that you haven't heard yet. She died at the George Street Respite site. She overdosed in the bathroom, and she was with her partner who nearly died as well. Staff at the respite sites are overwhelmed. The conditions are horrendous. There have been a number of other really tragic situations at the respites. There are 1,000 people staying at those respite sites. Last year, there were 800. It was a crisis last year. We couldn't imagine last year that there would be 1,000 staying in those spaces now. This is a crisis that was unimaginable a year or 2 years ago. It is an absolute emergency, and I want to implore you to declare it such. We need 2,000 beds in 2019, and the fastest, most immediate way to make that happen is by declaring it an emergency and bringing forth all of the resources possible from all 3 levels of government to make that happen, and to also deal with the many other immediate needs that we have around healthcare, around being able to open up spaces. The deaths of the 4 people that I read, Crystal Papineau's death was labeled by the coroner as death by misadventure. It's not misadventure, it's social murder. All 4 of these people died by social murder. And you today have the power to do something to begin to stop any more deaths from happening. And it is just utterly urgent and essential that you take that step today. Councillor Bailao, you said that if we're building more shelter beds, then we're failing, and I absolutely agree with you. And frankly, the city has failed utterly in terms of homelessness. The situation on the streets and in the respites and in the shelters clearly demonstrate how deeply the city has failed. And we need desperately to build housing. We need desperately to enforce the bylaw around Airbnb. We need desperately to support tenants. There are many, many things that we need to do. And the most urgent thing that we need to do to begin to deal with the fact that the city has failed is to put more shelter beds in. Because if we don't do that, more people are going to die. They're going to die this week. And that will be social murder. And that will be something that this council could have prevented. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, AJ, thanks for joining us today. Next deputant, MP Adam Vaughan.
Thank you. It's good to be back. There used to be more of you. I missed it. So I'm here, of course, as the Member of Parliament for Spadina Fort York downtown, but also as a resident and activist on this file as a citizen of the city. But I'm also the Parliamentary Secretary on Housing, so I'm available to answer questions as to where the new federal programs can and should be making a difference in the city, and also to respond to the letter that was released today, having just talked to the ministry and the office, where I've just returned from Ottawa. It's very cold up there too, that we're prepared to meet with you anywhere, anytime to talk about the situation in Toronto and to move it to a better place for the people who are being impacted by it. There are, of course, jurisdictional issues which concern us all, in particular at the provincial level right now, but many of the programs have been designed to work around these sorts of hostilities which some provincial governments are bringing to the housing file, and we're prepared, if necessary, to deal directly with the city, with or without the province on this issue. I would say that while we have obviously doubled the amount of money through the Homeless Partnership Strategy, while we've reprofiled it to get more into prevention methods to help stop the flow of new populations into homelessness, and while we have put new dollars on the table for the construction, repair, and subsidy of housing, those dollars aren't making the impact in Toronto that we want them to make, and we're prepared to sit down with the city to make the differences that need to be made. I'm going to say this, though, as a longtime advocate, as a longtime city councillor who voted every time in favor of this. If you do not create a rooming house bylaw that is comprehensive and citywide, you will not solve this problem. I've just completed a year-long study across the country on rooming houses, supportive housing, and the kind of housing that makes a difference in reducing homeless populations rather than managing the crisis. You cannot do it without group homes. You will not do it without group homes. The homeless people with lived experience will tell you they do not go into shelters because they do not feel safe in shelters. It doesn't matter how good your shelter seems to be. People want to go home. They don't want to go to shelter. You will not move people with complex medical and social issues into shelters in any great way, no matter how many you build. You need a comprehensive citywide rooming house bylaw so that group homes and supportive housing programs can be constructed right across the city, in every corner of the city, because the homeless come from every corner in the city. And it's time the city got serious about that. And this notion that you can warehouse homeless individuals in large institutional care facilities, it is inhumane. It does not respond to the housing rights and needs of individuals in these circumstances, and it has got to change. It has got to change. The cities in this country that have got to functional zero, the provinces that have got to functional zero on homelessness, have done it by using the analysis which is present in the sector to deal with homelessness as a function of poverty, but also a reality of the medical failure, the failure of the healthcare system. Brain injury, drug addiction, mental health issues, developmental disabilities that go undiagnosed are the 4 leading causes medically of this public health emergency. And the way to respond to it is to respond to it as a healthcare crisis as much as a housing crisis. And that also means you need to take a look at your don't ask, don't tell policy. Don't ask, don't tell policies are there not to report immigration status to the federal government. They're not there to prevent good public policy based on good data being implemented. And so when you refuse to understand the flow into homelessness by not asking people where they're coming from, i.e. are they being discharged from incarceration? Are they coming from mental health hospitals? Are they coming out of the child welfare system? Are they coming from the city, or are they coming from the province, or where are they coming from? When you don't have prevention strategies, the population grows. And so the Don't Ask, Tell policy, which I supported as a city councillor, was not there to deny people service. It was there to facilitate people's services. And the way it's being applied in the homeless shelters is stopping us from getting additional resources at the federal level to address specific population needs. For example, there's a new Indigenous housing program emerging out of the federal system that is designed to make an impact in urban centers. If we do not know the Indigenous background and populations, it's hard for us to assign additional dollars to Toronto. If Winnipeg is coming forward with strong numbers, and Edmonton is coming forward with strong numbers, and Vancouver is coming with strong numbers, and Toronto says we don't know, our capacity to fund those programs in Toronto is diminished because it's done on a per capita count. And so the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, again, is not there to report people to federal immigration services, and we understand why that policy is in place. But it needs to be looked at differently in terms of giving us data at the federal level that we can assign federal health dollars, federal Indigenous programming dollars, Veterans Affairs dollars, and a whole series of other issues more effectively to support you in creating the housing that's needed. Happy to answer questions.
Councillor Perks has some questions.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for your history of advocacy on that and the work you did here at City Council. I want to acknowledge that up front. Did I hear you correctly? Your government is prepared to support our call that this is an emergency.
We've been dealing with it as an emergency for the last
I'm not asking how you've been dealing with it. I'm asking if you're prepared to support our call that this is an emergency.
The call in of itself doesn't create a legislative response, but what we are prepared to do is sit down as the federal government to review what your strategy is and bring the federal resources required to deal with this issue. We're prepared, I mean, we're framing it as a human rights issue within legislation that's coming this year. We're prepared to deal with it the way we dealt with it last year.
Okay.
You tell us what you need, we're prepared to sit down.
How about you answer my question?
So the declaration doesn't have a legal status within the federal housing.
Can I ask, how much money did the federal government spend last year constructing new affordable and social housing?
So in the last 3 years, we've spent above and beyond what was there when we took office, which was at about $1.7 billion and scheduled to be $1.1. We've spent $5.7 billion over the last 3 years.
5.7 over the last 3 years?
Above and beyond the $1.7 billion that was there. So it's when you add it all together.
7.4. And the total federal budget annually is about $300 billion?
It's roughly, yeah.
300 billion, so 3 years of that is 900 million. So out of your 900 million, that's less.
Sorry, so that's the new spending. That's the spending we added on top of.
No, I totaled it. The new spending plus the existing spending gives you 7.4.
No, that's
over
right.
3 years.
There's additional programs there. I mean,
I asked for construction of housing. Right. 7.4 is less than 1% of the federal budget. Okay.
No, you'd have to add.
Now, you've said you're prepared to come to the table. You said you're prepared to come to the table and help us. Recently, the City of Toronto declared 11 sites as sites where we want to build social and affordable housing. Is your government prepared to partner to make sure that that is all socially owned housing?
We're prepared.
Will you put the money up to help us do that? Will you bid alongside the private sector to make that something like, say, the St. Lawrence housing?
The National Co-Investment Fund is in, and the CMHC is in talks with the city right now on its housing program, and we're prepared to come with a specific dollar streamed specifically for Toronto, substantial dollars.
For those sites?
I haven't reviewed the actual application because it's at CMHC, which is a Crown Corporation, and does it with an arm's length but the Minister's office can confirm that the City of Toronto and the federal government are in conversation about the city's housing strategy to get those funded, in the same way that we stepped up at 200 Madison, in the same way we stepped up on the waterfront, in the same way that we stepped up at York Weston. The co-investment fund is available to the City of Toronto, and we're in active communication right now, negotiating the final components of a significant investment in the City of Toronto. How the city chooses to spend it, we have listened to what the FCM and the municipalities have said. You want to direct those dollars. You don't want the federal government telling you how to spend it, but the resources are there to be spent.
Okay. And final question.
Just be clear.
It is your government, after all, that sets the. You mentioned the requirements that you would like us to get rid of. Don't ask, don't tell, so that we can get better.
What I said was I didn't ask you to get rid of it. What I asked you to do is to think about how it's being applied within the shelter system from a data perspective, not from a reporting perspective.
So who set the requirement that we have to provide that data to get the money? That's the federal government, right?
No,
It's not the provincial government, it's not the municipal government. Who sets that requirement?
What we've said is that there are federal programs that are dispensed on a per capita basis. The better the data we have, the better the funding.
You set those requirements.
No.
I want to thank you for your years of advocacy and once again, feel deep regret that there's a party system federally.
Yeah, otherwise you could join. But I also would just like to clarify that the federal housing spend is not unique to CMHC. There are federal housing programs, for example, in Indigenous affairs, which aren't calculated in the number you received there. And I wouldn't have those at hand, but we topped that up by $2.5 billion as well last year.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much for coming in today and sharing those comments with us. Just a question, if council were to deem this as a state of emergency and the letter we're discussing here today, how would that change the federal government's response?
As it relates specifically to housing, I'm not quite sure how the declaration would compel the minister that I work for, Families and Children's Social Services, to move forward, but there is an emergency protocol in place. Cities nominate their request to the provinces, and the provinces evaluate and nominate to the federal government. We have been prepared to have those conversations last year. We're prepared to have them this year.
Thank you.
It doesn't take
Councillor, is that it, Councillor Bradford? Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, years ago, the federal government through CMHC gave money for co-ops to build more co-ops or expand. Yep. Is that something that you're doing right now?
Yep.
How much?
It's on a project-by-project, jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction basis. So the co-investment fund, which was made active in May, has just started. I can get the exact dollars. One of the challenges we've had is that it takes a while for the projects to get through regulatory approval process. You know, when a zoning application comes in, it takes a couple of years. So while the money has been activated this year, the dollars don't flow immediately. But in the previous
How much has
3
been
years,
activated?
in the previous 3 years, new federal funding has reached 1 million different households in Canada with subsidy, grants, and loans to get housing built. I was in Newfoundland last week opening up a supportive housing unit for youth. We're in Hamilton today opening up another facility for seniors. There are projects right across the country which are being pushed forward, and as I said, 1 million homes across the country as a result of new federal investments since 2015 have been invested in with subsidies, grants, construction loans, and financing, as well as federal land to get
How much is built. In the co-op investment fund then?
There's a $17.2 billion fund over the next 10 years that builds on top of the $5 billion we've invested. Of that fund, it's up to projects to determine whether or not they're co-op or supportive housing or public housing. We don't have a carve-out for any one particular sector, but all sectors are
You don't have
eligible.
any carve-out yet, or planned carve-out for
beyond the $17
housing.
billion. No, there's no carve-out within that program, but co-op housing is eligible to partner with it.
So you're not targeting new co-ops?
We're targeting
As the federal.
We're targeting affordable housing everywhere with all $17 billion.
But you're not creating the co-op sector and giving them dollars. That's not part of your.
We have worked with the CHFC Canada to make sure that the program will build co-ops, and we're working with the Co-op Federation right now to build co-ops. There's no specific delineation for applicants. There's no separated programs in terms of supportive housing, co-op housing, public housing.
There was in the past.
It's a global program to get it
I understand, but in the past there has been separate co-op
Yes,
housing
there was Section
funded
95 and Section...
plan
Yep.
in order to increase the co-op housing stock.
Yep.
That doesn't exist in that way now with this fund.
No,
You're
we
confirming that. Okay. I understand what you're saying about how zoning and getting things moving, it's very hard. So having property available. And last year, I did ask for all of the federal properties that are available in Toronto. Do you happen to know what they all are? Federal properties that are owned by the federal government here in the city of Toronto?
We have a list of surplus properties that we're withholding from Canada Lands to put into the housing system so that people can build on those properties. I can get you the list that's being composed so far. There have been some trouble because of the way in which the surplus system works at the federal level. The federal system has, over the last 12 years, been designed to deliver surplus property to market at market rates. That is undermining our capacity to build housing on it. And so we have asked for a reevaluation through the civil service of all federal holdings right across the country, in partnership with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, to review those holdings to see what's appropriate for housing.
How many properties have been red circled then for the city?
In Toronto, I can get back to you with a firm number.
Maybe we could get that for the council meeting. Do you think it's enough properties have been red circled?
Look, I'm a housing activist first and foremost. It's never enough.
So the process the city is engaged in, which is our surplus lands and now 11 sites for housing, you don't have that plan yet?
Look, if it was up to me,
Federal properties.
it's every square inch of property. When I was at the city, I looked at as housing. When properties came forward, in the ward I represented, I looked at every single opportunity to put properties there. I know that
How many federal properties are in your ward?
in my
Riding. Sorry, you don't have a ward anymore. How many are in your riding?
I don't have a number offhand, and I'm not.
Oh, you don't
gonna
know?
guess one. Yeah. But I can tell you things, look at all orders of government have to change the way they manage surplus land.
And that is an easy thing to do?
No.
No, it is not. That's
And look at the Green P policies you have here. The market valuations to return those pieces of property to the housing division of the city make those properties almost impossible to build on. We haven't prioritized. Any order of government every order of government has responsibility to solve this problem, and we haven't prioritized housing from my perspective.
But you don't have sites identified in the same way that we have sites.
Look, I worked for
Just
almost
asking.
10 years on trying to
You're
get
gonna have to
housing
consider that
established
the
on
last
Scading
question.
Court.
Do you have sites identified in Toronto for
We are
discrete housing?
reviewing every site and making sure
you
every
don't
site, and
have
if there's a
any
site you think is suitable, I will fight like hell to make
Well,
sure
if
you
we
get your
could
hands
figure
on
out what they are, I'm going to ask the staff later.
Thank
We
you.
can do that.
Councillor Fletcher.
Happy to look at them.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much. Most of the questions have already been answered. I have one. Can you clarify for us, I want to say Adam, MP Vaughn, can you clarify for us, how would it work if the province was not going to respond to the city's requests? And you, as our federal representative and on behalf of the federal government, was prepared to have that formal dialogue to bring to bear the full force and the wholeness of our two governments to work together to address the housing crisis if the provincial government decided not to respond. What would that mechanism, how would it look like? What do you envision?
What I've heard from the press conference today and from reading the letter is that you'd like to meet with the political leads on the housing files at the Government of Canada. And what I've said to you is that we're prepared to sit down and figure out what resources are available, how to make sure they land in Toronto, and how to utilize them to solve this situation. We are committed to reducing, if not ending, homelessness over the next 10 years. The dollars we put on the table are directed to getting that done. It requires more than just simply a declaration of emergency status. It requires actually doing things. And so we'll look at your strategy and we will plug in where we can, how we can, the federal resources that will help you achieve what you've set out as an objective. But we need to see that plan, and as I said, I'm prepared to meet anywhere, anytime, as the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing to discuss getting federal resources into the city to address the challenges we have in front of us. But I'm also telling you as a citizen, and as a longtime housing advocate, and as a former councillor, that it requires us sitting down and talking about it. and modeling the programs to make sure they work in Toronto. Our goal here is not to tell you how to solve the problem. Our goal is to make sure the resources are there to facilitate your solutions. And so bring us your solutions and we will work hard with you. But I can tell you, having studied this issue across the country, you are not going to reduce your homeless population if you don't have supportive housing as a critical component to depopulate your shelters. You will never depopulate your shelters without supportive housing. Supportive housing requires a licensed and regulated rooming house bylaw across the city. Every jurisdiction in the country that has had success on this file has done that. A failure to deliver on that critical piece of legislation is going to thwart your attempts to solve the problem. You cannot warehouse your way out of this issue, and you cannot manage your way out of this issue. You have to reduce the population of homeless people, and you do that with strong income supports, strong zoning regulation, and a critical strategy that depopulates your shelter rather than grows your shelter system.
To clarify, my question so it's just to clarify also, the recommendation in the letter is not necessarily for the federal government to evaluate a City of Toronto plan, but rather to develop a plan together in response to a crisis that emerged, not simply in Toronto, although we are naming it, but as I see it, this is a crisis that's across the country and many other jurisdictions as well.
We're here to be your partner.
Thank you. And so the question I have is, in the absence of provincial active participation and collaboration, there are agreements that are in place that stipulate how federal dollars flow to the province and then are redistributed, even if they're named for municipalities. In the absence of provincial participation and collaboration, how will you get those federal dollars to the city directly?
Well, I'd invite you to take a look at the situation with the surge in refugee and immigrant populations in your shelters last year when the province refused to cooperate or negotiate or talk. We went around the province and funded the cities directly. Our preference in the Constitution and provincial-federal relations dictate that we try the province, and we will continue to try and get the Ford government on side with smart, intelligent policies. Removing rent control is not one of those policies, but voters of Ontario chose the government they chose. In the interim, or in response to that, if the only way to deal with the situation in Toronto is to deal with the City of Toronto directly, I'm telling you right now, right here, we are prepared to deal with the City of Toronto directly. The co-investment fund does not require provincial matching dollars to be used in Toronto. And we are in active negotiations with the city's housing authorities to make sure the co-investment fund gets to work in the city. We are here to be partners and to work constructively. And it's time to get to work on this. And you have my full and total commitment to cooperate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I do have a question. I just want to follow up on that. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the city is in negotiations and has been negotiating since the National Housing Strategy has been launched, which we called on several times and advocated strongly to have that done. But right now there are work both for the repairs on social housing and for new sites. So there's active conversations at the highest level to have housing built, to have housing repair between the federal government and the city. Is that correct?
We're in active negotiation, and I'm led to believe that it's moving in the right direction very quickly.
Thank you. And the big city mayors also meets with your government on a regular basis, and from what I understand, housing is an issue that is openly discussed, not only with our mayor, but actually with mayors across the country, because unfortunately this is an issue that is targeting from coast to coast to coast.
I was in Edmonton last month with the big city mayors discussing this very issue, and they're coming to Ottawa next, I think, 2 weeks from now to renew the conversations about how we can accelerate and amplify the program. It is a priority for our government. It's a priority for your level of government. It works best when the province and Indigenous governments are at the table simultaneously. But in the absence of other partners, we will continue to talk directly with the City of Toronto to achieve your housing strategy. Yeah.
And I mean, have you seen an effort on the part of city, I mean, because I recall even the summit a year and a half ago that we had the big city mayors, again, calling on the federal government. We had the minister in there. We had a full discussion with stakeholders about housing, about this issue, about how to work together. Have we been engaged with the other orders of government to tackle this issue?
The City of Toronto's voice has not left the choir of people singing for a stronger housing policy in this country. I'd invite you to talk to Mayor Lisa Helps of Victoria, who has negotiated an end to homelessness over the next 3-year strategy with the federal government. They think they'll get to functional zero over the next 3 years. They have a significant population of homeless individuals, including large tent cities, both in the downtown and on the outskirts of that city. But they have negotiated a comprehensive agreement with the federal government and their provincial government and Indigenous local governments, and they're moving towards successful resolution of some very challenging issues. Their population was growing by the same percentages as Toronto was, it's a flexible program. We are not dictating outcomes or dictating forms of housing or dictating dynamics in this area. We're here to partner with you and take a look at the program that you think works in Toronto and make sure federal resources are brought to bear on it.
So one of the things that we piloted last year was actually giving some tools to our frontline staff with housing allowances and on a case-by-case really try to house people. I know that the housing benefit from the National Housing Strategy is not coming into effect until
next year.
Next year. If we were to approach you to have a very targeted approach toward this issue using some of these methods, do you think that is something that we could work with the federal government?
So part of the National Housing Strategy also is a $9.2 billion investment into the community housing sector. Those dollars are the operating agreements that are being renewed and housing subsidies that are being dispensed across the country, in this case through the province to Toronto. We have relaxed the rules on the homeless partnership strategy around how rent supplements can be used in that program. Previously, the last government required you only to use them on people with chronic homelessness, only on people who've been homeless for 6 months and frequent users of the shelter. The restrictive use of those dollars was almost pushed young people in particular, but also women, into the most dangerous circumstances you can imagine before federal dollars would help them. The reprofiling of that program, now called Reaching Home, allows you to use those in preventative ways to particularly address the situation facing women and youth aging out of care. As well, we have no longer, we will no longer require you to spend those dollars on private landlords, subsidizing in some case slum landlords' mortgages instead of helping people get housing. We have now changed those rules based on people with lived experience, cities and other stakeholders telling us that those dollars should also be eligible to be used in public housing complexes and co-ops. And so the subsidies are reaching new people in new ways to focus on prevention, but also to focus on permanent. The other thing we've done, which I think is critically important on the homeless file, is that we remove the requirement under Reaching Home, under HPS, that if you use federal dollars as rent supplement, you can't use other forms of government support to provide housing. In other words, if you have a drug treatment center and you get a housing first rent allowance, all of a sudden they will pull that money if there's healthcare money on the table, whether it's provincial, federal, or municipal. If there is additional dollars being provided, for example, by mental health field workers, or if there's money being provided by other orders of government, Veterans Affairs, Indigenous Affairs, CMHC and the HPS program would pull those dollars out of the system because you already had a government subsidy. The new program allows you to partner up federal programs, provincial programs, city programs, and charitable programs, and reward partnerships that work at creating supportive housing. This is to turn it from being simply a way to house people into house people with supports. We think those supports are critical to ending homelessness, and we've reintroduced that flexibility to the program that was started by Claudette Bradshaw in the late 90s.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today, Adam.
No worries.
Thanks. And last deputant is Rita DiBiase. Good morning, Rita. Thanks for joining us today.
My name is Rita DiBiase. I'm a PSW. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't want to ask, I don't want to hope, I want to demand that you declare this a crisis. I just want to mention about this 80-year-old woman that I'm dealing with in a respite. An 80-year-old should not be in a respite. The system has failed her. She wants to die. She doesn't want to be there. She sleeps on a chair. You complain about it, they don't do anything about it. I came yesterday face to face to the mayor, face to face. This is the second time. I told him about this 80-year-old woman in a respite, and I was in bloody tears, and he was so dismissive with me. He says under privacy issues, we can't divulge any information. She was missing, but I found her at another location. I go all around to different respites, different shelters, advocating for these people. I just saw a person yesterday on the streetcar, and she recognized me. She thanked me because I was advocating for her for a token last year. There needs to be changes. We need affordable housing. You've heard it before, affordable housing, we need more support. I went to another respite. There's a whole bunch of seniors that are soiling themselves. They need a PSW there, like myself, to help them out because the staff can't shower them. The conditions are no different than Moss Park from last year. You complain to the ombudsman, you complain to the shelter services, nothing gets done. It's the same old, same old. And I'm really disappointed in our mayor. I'm very disappointed in our mayor, Tory, and I wish he was here. Very dismissive. And I'm still waiting for him to come feed the homeless with my grandson and I. It's been 2.5 years he said he would do this. So I hope you do declare this a state of emergency. And that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you. Is that your final thought? Thank you. Thanks. Any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you, Rita, for joining us today. Okay. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, and you might not have this here, but it would be very helpful to have it at council. And last year, when we had our emergency debate about shelter beds, I believe we agreed to add quite a number of new ones, including the respite centers. I also had a motion that was passed by City Council asking for the properties that are owned by the provincial government and the federal government here within the 416 boundaries. And I don't know if that's made available or if that would be something available for City Council, because we've heard how difficult it is to find sites, and we've heard from MP Vaughn that they're interested in giving some of those surplus properties over to housing. So I would very much like to know what properties there are.
Through you, Madam Chair, we don't have that list together, Councillor Fletcher, here for this meeting. I'm not sure if it exists or not, but we are seeking to determine what happened to the motion requesting it, who it ought to have been directed to, and who's done the work. So we'll see what we can put together as far as what we know on provincial and federal ownership of land within the 416 in time for council.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any more questions? Seeing none. Speakers? Councillor Perks?
Thank you very much. This issue always leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth for the obvious reason that it's a collective social failure. It is, as was said, social murder. We are one of the wealthiest places on earth in history. And yet we're constructing these domes, which frankly, to my eye, look like refugee camps. We're actually building refugee camps in the city of Toronto to house people because our housing market and housing system has failed so spectacularly. It doesn't have to be this way. Within my lifetime, all three orders of government got together and built social housing as a partnership between public governments, co-ops, not-for-profits, mixed income housing. And it's not as if that model failed. That's actually the model that is being used in all the successful cities in Europe for managing their housing. In cities like Stockholm and Paris and Berlin, Vienna, The housing system, in many cases, houses not just people with mental health issues, not just people with low incomes, but the middle class as well. It's a mixed housing system that's flexible and is, because it has mixed incomes, it's self-funding over time. This is entirely possible, but our federal housing policy is driven towards getting people to buy homes. Right now, the Federal Housing Agency, CMHC, backstops $500 billion in mortgages. That means we use our federal money to encourage people to buy houses and condos, which drives up the price, which pushes renters out, which creates a housing and homeless policy. I remember going to marches with Kathy and Adam and others in the room 15 years ago where we said, no, the solution is that all orders of government have to put 1% of their budget into building social housing. Well, we just heard that the famous National Housing Strategy is not there. They haven't yet, at nearly the end of their first mandate, even got to the basic ask that housing activists, including Adam Vaughan, have been asking for 20 years. We know our provincial government is not stepping up. So what do? We step up. We step up. On Monday, we will launch a budget. I'm going to have my eye on that budget for two things. First, are we adequately funding the emergency Band-Aid system that we need to fund? Are we increasing it so the shelter beds are there? But two, and most importantly, are we increasing the amount of money that we ask Torontonians to contribute to us building affordable and supportive housing in the City of Toronto? That's what I'm going to be looking for on Monday. And if it's not there, then shame on us. There is a way to solve this. There is a way to solve this. Uncounted billions of dollars are being taken out of Toronto by people who are buying up land and making short-term speculative profits, developing them for condominium. 15, 20%, 25% of the cost of the project disappears to the financing, to the banks, and to the profit of the developers. That's a quarter of the cost of all housing being built privately in Toronto. Goes away from the housing market and turns into profit for banks and developers. We, as a government, don't need to pay that 25%. We don't need to have a short-term return on investment. We can be patient. We can just pay off the mortgage cost, the financing cost of building that over 10, 20 years at a very low interest rate. We don't have to walk away with a profit. We just have to pay off those debts. There is an ample opportunity. There's land, there's the willingness, at least on the part of the public. Everyone I talk to says they're prepared to contribute to build social housing. The one thing is, will this government step up and say, for the first time, that housing people who are in dire need is more important than protecting those who already own million-dollar houses from a property tax increase? It's a simple choice. Whose need is bigger, the person who has no home or the person who owns a home that's worth $1 million?
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm obviously here because I want to be able to support this recommendation that's contained in the letter from Councillor Perks and I. But I also want to highlight the fact that there has been some debate around whether or not we declare it an emergency, whether or not we've reached this point where we should call it a crisis. And I want to frame it in a way that if we have thousands of people, literally 9,000 people or so, sleeping in precarious situations that are on the street or in the shelter system, in the motels by way of a sort of an ad hoc shelter component out of the code, and that is an existing condition that we have today. And we've also seen literally 2 deaths 2 deaths per week is what we're averaging right now with people who are street involved and those who are living with various states of homelessness. By any measure, I think that we would call that an emergency, a crisis. The challenge is that I believe, like climate change, it has crept up upon us. So it's something that we have experienced over a period of time, and it's something that we actually could do something about it, but we didn't. We are now reaching this critical point. The biggest fear I have is the wave of homelessness that is about to hit Toronto coming up next. And that is through rent evictions, of course. It's around the fact that we have a number of active listings on Airbnb sites that are about 65,000 in number on average that should not be there, that are off the market for long-term homes. It's the fact that we've got 14,000 individuals on the supportive housing wait list, and at the rate of only housing 600 average per year, it's literally a death sentence. We have 181,000 people on the wait list for individual supportive housing, which means that if you're looking for a 2-bedroom from your family, including a child, you're looking at a wait close to 12 years and much longer if you get called at all. Again, it's a death sentence. And that's just the managed problem that we have now. And we've not been able to apply all 3 orders of government with the wholeness of their government coming to bear on finding a resolution. The big fear I have is that even if we pass these recommendations today, we get to the floor of council, we can tinker around or perhaps even try to water down the language because we don't want to offend this person or that person, I'm not sure. But my biggest fear is that if we don't follow up with true concrete actions with the other orders of government or just one order of government coming to the table, we're going to be in bigger trouble than we are in now, 12 months from now. I think the housing advocates were really clear. None of us could have imagined, and even myself, who was on the front lines last year trying to figure out how do we stop the gaps and the bleeding. I never would have imagined 12 months from now that we're having a bigger crisis than we had last year. I thought last year was quite honestly was bad, but we've reached this critical point that we have to do something about it that's much bigger than simply declaring it as a crisis, which we need to do because we need to name it in order for us to respond to it with the sense of urgency, coordinated partnerships that require tangible outcomes. And if we don't name it, and we don't move with the velocity that we need to move on, I'm fearful that this is going to run away from us so fast, and it's going to scale up in a way that we will not be able to do anything about it later on. We still have a chance to turn this around. I believe this in my heart. I believe that we have just stopped collaborating, stopped coming to an outcome of building the widest range of social housing, and it's not too late. But at some point in time, just like climate change, it will be too late, and the body count will simply be too high. And that's why we need to come back to the fundamental piece. Housing is a human right. By all international standards of human rights law, we have failed, not just in Toronto and not just Ontario, but across this country. And so I don't want to play the numbers game with any other order of government that we've said this or we will contribute this. What I am interested in, and I hope that you are as well, is the outcomes. Will we have more people housed by the time we finish this conversation and develop a truly funded action plan in the future 12 months from now? Or are we going to be back 12 months from now with a situation that's gotten worse? And to me, that will be the measurement of success and progress, and not just a declaration of words, but it is important that we start now with this declaration and take immediate action afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Bradford.
Thank you very much, Chair. As we've heard from the deputants today, we know that the city needs a coordinated response on housing. In the past few months, I personally have been getting a deeper understanding of how people are experiencing homelessness. We've attended a number of vigils across the street at Trinity Church. We've been meeting with members of our local faith groups, Barry Watson from Peaches United Church, and they're telling me that the Out of the Cold program is completely over capacity. We heard that here again this morning today. So for me, the takeaway is very clear. We need to do more. And, you know, housing is a planning issue, but it's also a social services issue. It's an economic development issue. It's about health, and it's about community. And there's a lot of complexity in there. And I think today's conversation is the right place to start. This letter is the right place to start on all of that. For me, when I think of City Council's approach over the past year, and I wasn't here, but I followed it closely, and prior to the council cuts, council had voted on creating a standing committee on housing. And this was meant to be a place where we could bring all of those pieces of the puzzle together. And this committee is now gone as a part of the cuts. So when we're talking about working with partners, provincial level of government, federal level of government, that's something that we definitely need to keep in mind. So the steps today, they need to start with the city. And of course, we should be advocating as hard as we can for other resources. Of course we should. And perhaps actually our Housing Now properties could be used as a model for federally owned sites. We heard from MP Vaughan that the federal government wants to work with us on those sites. We also heard from Councillor Perks about building mixed income properties. So, you know, going forward, I'm looking forward to seeing the details on those federally owned sites and what opportunities exist. It might actually be an opportunity for them to replicate some of the work that we're doing on those pieces right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to everybody who came down today and for the councillors putting their letter on here. So we're not just having the discussion about the Vice Chair, but we're actually talking about housing. I think it would be helpful as well, I know the clerk isn't here, but for scoping out for each committee what they're dealing with around the housing file, which would be helpful for us to get that idea. So understand you have a motion. I'll support that, Chair. These properties, I just want to get back to the properties, because the only reason that we're able to say we're going to take 11 sites and try to make as many houses as deeply affordable as possible is because we have these properties that have been identified first through Build Toronto and now through Create TO, and through this election that we went through that, quite frankly, was about affordable housing. So I'm very proud of 11 sites. I want to, as Councillor Perks said, get more money for those sites so they can go deeper and deeper on the affordability scale, that there's a very deep sliding affordability on all of those sites. But when I'm talking about the properties, last year when we had this very debate about, and I remember AJ Withers came and brought me a chart that had all the people and the number of beds that we need to add, and we worked hard to add those beds this year. But that we also asked, what are the properties that the federal government and the provincial government owns in the City of Toronto, just as we know what ours are and what may be suitable for housing? I'm bitterly disappointed that we don't have that, and I'm asking our Deputy City Manager if we can get that. But also I recall one, I'm not sure which level of government, told us they won't give us that. So if that's the case, we're going to have to ask again, because this is an important way to ask for housing, be able to build housing. And we all know of sites that were sold for not a lot, sites that were sold without any housing. And we're really putting our foot down at the city to say housing has to be part of our thinking on every single site that we have. And that is a big step forward. I would really hope that the federal government would do their co-op housing funding and get co-op housing back into the mix across this country. There's no more successful type of affordable housing than co-op, self-managed affordable housing. Wow. And as well, to look for our Tenants First plan that would spin off some of the smaller TCHC properties into co-ops. So we're going to hear more about that later. The real deal here is the renovictions, which have been discussed this morning, Airbnb, which is driving out affordability. I have one rooming house in my ward with over 25 people living in a registered legal rooming house that there's a very real fear that the owner is evicting people, not just to fix it up, but to create short-term housing where there's been stable housing for low-income people. And it's this committee where we have to look at those policies, and that includes our rooming house policy, our dwelling policy. I'm just going to go back to policy again around Toronto community housing, because we've had our Revite sites, but very few of them have added any housing. So all levels of government for our policy around land we own, we haven't put the housing lens on until this very moment in the City of Toronto in a really aggressive way. And I think we have to be aggressive as well around ensuring that all those lands, including TCH lands, can have new affordable or new social housing when they're rebuilt. And lastly, I'll just say for number 4, I was very heartened to hear that MP Vaughan said, we'll meet you anywhere, anytime, whatever you need. And I think number 4 actually, and I'd ask you to do that, Chair, send that to the Mayor to start that immediately with MP Vaughan and others for the supportive housing, for co-op housing, for federal lands being brought in, for real discussions about real things, and to say to the levels of government, here's our projects, here's the housing, we need X dollars in order to do that, and have a clearer ask than for large amounts for exact projects that we want funded.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I do have a motion that staff is just working on. I would like to start by thanking everybody that joined us here today, and all the advocates that all you do here, many of you for many, many years. This is an issue that, some people want, call for the city to declare a crisis, an emergency. Many of us have called it a crisis and an emergency many, many years ago. We've had campaigns here in the city with, the Close the Housing Gap, with billboards where we asked MPs and MPPs, residents to write their MPs, their MPPs. We've taken buses of people to Ottawa to call for a national housing strategy. We had big city mayors meetings to call on billions of dollars from our other orders of government. We have been calling on the other orders of government with you, and we need to continue doing that. And today is another step in the right direction to say, we're still not there. We do have a national housing strategy, but these are still the issues that we have in front of us. We had an 80% increase on our shelter and respite centers. We had 5 years ago 3,800 beds of shelter beds. We have over 7,000 of shelter beds as we speak today. This is not the way to go. We need to invest in our supportive housing. We need to invest in our housing, But we need also to take in consideration that housing takes time to build. Supportive housing takes time to build. So we do need the conversation around the issues of, can we have an approach right now? Can we use our housing benefits? Can we work with our nonprofit housing providers, with the health sector, and how can we have the support services to the people that need it the most? How can we prevent the evictions that are happening more and more often? So I think these are all discussions that need to happen, that need to continue to happen, honestly. I mean, we are in, right now, we have, we're fortunate enough to have a couple of hundred units of supportive housing under construction. That was also done with our money that comes from Homes for Good. With the previous government had invested. We need to continue that kind of investment. We need to ask our provincial partners to continue that kind of investment. We have tomorrow at Executive, we will be talking about thousands of units. That is an investment that the city for decades had not put in. We're investing every year $300 million now to repair TCHC. We finally have a line item in our capital budget that is part of fixing TCHC. We are putting up our land, and we've challenged other orders of government to do the same. We want to build housing, we want to continue to build housing, but we're just catching up. We're just catching up with an 80% increase in the last 2 years in the use of our shelters. It is true, we can't do it alone. We need the other orders of government to come to the table. We've been saying it for years, together as advocates, and many of us, and we need to continue saying that. The recognition has been given, right? People have recognized just up the street that there is a housing situation happening in this city. MPPs increased their housing allowances by 20%, as Miguel said. It's so true. They recognize there's a housing issue. We should have our housing allowances increased by 20%. I'm sure our streets to home people out there with 20% more housing allowances could help a lot of people get home right there. So let's have that conversation. Absolutely, let's continue the conversation and call for real solutions, pragmatic solutions, bringing solutions to the table. So I want to thank everybody, and I hope I can get the support of the committee to have this going to council. I'm just asking that the city manager and city solicitor comment on the recommendations 1, 2, and 3, because I know there will be questions, and so I think it's better that they prepare a report right away. As per recommendation of our vice chair, recommendation 4 to be referred to the mayor to have immediately action on this. And recommendation 5, the only thing I ask your permission to change is that instead of automatically saying that it needs to be Red Cross, that we leave it open for our staff to choose Red Cross or other providers. I think it's just wise to leave it up to them, because we might even need more than one. It might not be just one provider. And the other thing is, as we know, there has been, we have housing issues coming to this committee and housing issues going to community economic development and community committee. So we deal more with the bricks and mortars of the housing. They deal with the operational. So the operations of shelters, the capacity issues, all these issues are dealt in the economic and community development. That's what I was informed, but I would like to have clerks informing all of us, all committee chairs, and to make it clear out there so that when people have these issues that they know which committee to go to, and that the chairs are well informed and the members of the committee are well informed of the mandates of their committee. And welcome, and that people are welcome, and that we ensure that you always have a right and an opportunity to voice your opinions and your concerns, which I think is really important as city government, so that we make that clear for everybody. So with that saying, you have a question, go ahead.
I just want to understand your part 2 of your motion. So when you were speaking, I thought I heard you say that you want to do it that way so the mayor can convene the meeting quickly prior to the January 30th council meeting. Did I understand?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. Absolutely. Okay. I would like it as soon as possible.
If it's just about speeding it up.
Yep.
So could we add, be referred to the mayor to convene a meeting with the parties and report to council on the outcome of that meeting?
On the outcome of that meeting or that action, can we say that? Because, I mean, if they're scheduled...
It says convene a meeting. So whenever he has the meeting,
sure,
he writes a letter to council.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Can we make that amendment? Yeah, friendly amendment. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Councillor. To clarify the intention of your motion, you're recommending that portions 1, 2, and 3 of our letter be sent to the city manager and the city solicitor. What do you hope that they provide to us as advice? And I'll just give you an example. Recommendation 1 in the letter simply has City Council affirming our commitment to comply with international human rights law as it pertains to homelessness as a human rights. What do you hope that the city manager or the city solicitor can provide that could add additional meaning and value to this discussion?
I think that we need to, people will want to understand what are the implications, what this means, and I think it's just prudent just to get that report. And they might say nothing to comment. Whatever. I just think it is important that we get some feedback from staff on what the implications of this could be.
The issue around human rights is a body of law and values that supersedes, I would say, any particular micro subnational order of government. It is a value proposition statement.
Yep. And city solicitor could probably mention that.
Okay. And so is the intention to try to find a way out of the recommendations that are in the letter? Is your intention to water
Not at
down
all.
our intent?
Not at all. Not at all. It's just to give that context from the city solicitor. She'll probably say exactly what you're saying, but I think it is important actually to have everyone and our colleagues understanding all that, because I think you'll make it easier to actually get the support at council, and I would like to have a strong support for it.
And so the intention to refer recommendation 2 and 3, again, to the city manager and the city solicitor, especially as it pertains to our relationship and declaration of the emergency status and with the province, what are you trying to do there? I want to make sure that we are going to achieve an outcome that will allow us to speak with absolute clarity on the floor of council, as opposed to watering down or perhaps diluting the crisis until it becomes no longer a crisis by the manufacturing and wordsmithing of it all.
I don't think it's no intention of everybody diluting the crisis. The crisis is the crisis, and the crisis is what we see day in and day out in the system. It's not the wording of this motion that is going to make the crisis bigger or smaller. The crisis is out. The crisis is the numbers of people that we're having using our system, to be honest with you. I just want them to give a little bit of background so people understand what we're doing. We've had this done in the past. Last time we had, we wanted to declare a state of emergency. Staff just, what does it mean? And just have the report going and to clarify exactly what it means.
And because the last time staff stipulated that it wasn't technically within the intention of an emergency and a crisis, City Council sat on its hands and did nothing. And that was the result of putting it into the hands of the bureaucrats, as opposed to taking a strong political position stating these are the values and the line in the sand that we wanted to draw.
But I do understand that, but I think that it is important to have their professional opinion, and we are the politicians, and we need to take the action given that advice. So we will take the action. As you may see, some of us might take it, some of us might not take it, but I don't think we can hide staff's advice or saying it's not going to come forward because it's not convenience for the point of view that I'm trying to make. It is what it is. They're professionals. They're going to give us their professional advice. We are politicians. We take that professional advice. We take the advice of the advocates. We take everybody's advice, and we make our decision. It is our decision to make. But hiding professional advice of our staff, I don't think it's the way to go. I think we just put it out there in the clear. It's their advice.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that we're hiding anything. I'm simply suggesting that we're going to find a way to dilute, to take away the urgency, to find a technical excuse on why we should not take urgent action. And if that is the intention of the motion, or the intention of, that may be an outcome of the staff report, that it doesn't fit into a neat little technical box, therefore we shouldn't do it, then this entire conversation and all the deputants that have spoken, their words were not heard today.
I think that's
because they won't get a chance to speak, unfortunately, at City Council when that report comes out from staff that says it doesn't fit into a neat, tiny little box.
Councillor, I think that the urgency, the crisis, the actions that I've been taking are what they are. I think that we need, as chair of the committee that is having a letter from 2 other colleagues being presented in here, I think prudent to ask staff to report on that, to give as much information to all the 25 councillors that will make a decision on this. That's all I'm trying to say. I think that we are all elected officials and that we have a responsibility to take that professional advice with the advice from advocates and with the advice from everybody and make our own choices and decisions. I think the urgency, the crisis, I've used housing crisis for years and years, didn't have to have it declared by council. It's just the way that I've referred to this whole situation. I think that the steps, the concrete actions that are actually going to come out of this, for me, is the most important thing. And I think that we just need to give our colleagues the information and start talking about the concrete actions that need to be taken.
Thank you, Councillor. I won't be able to support all the motion. What I'm hoping to do is perhaps break it up into portions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just clarify that, just more than likely, City Council would send that to staff to get an opinion?
Yeah, I
thought
want to
you were trying
prevent
to
that as
speed this
well.
up.
I want to prevent that as well, because it'll be a great debate. The people will say they
I thought you
don't.
were trying to speed up, let legal say
Yeah,
that would, and
they don't-
then now we have information.
Because people will say they don't have the information, people will say they don't have the background to make the decision, and I'm just trying to give them as much background that it's just not councillor's opinion, and then every single person will have to make up their mind, given all these things together.
So it's not slowing it down, it's actually making sure it's discussed at this council meeting, 'cause no doubt would go.
With as much information so everybody can make a decision. Okay. So clerks has asked me to make an amendment, so instead of planning and housing committee request city clerk, it's going to be city council request the city manager and city clerk to advise. So on recommendation 5. So taking that, so can I have a vote on the motion? All those in favor? So you want item 1, 2, 3, and 4, everything voted separate, just one, and then the rest of them together? Okay. Can I have a vote for recommendation 1? Recorded vote?
All those in favor of the highlighted motion before you, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Robinson. All those opposed, Councillor Wong-Tam.
And to the remaining recommendations, all those in favor? Recorded vote?
So all those in favor of adopting the highlighted section of the motion, Councillor Bradford, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Wong-Tam. That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting? Councillor Bradford. Thank you. All those in favor? And that concludes our first meeting of Planning and Housing Committee.